One, two, three, four.
Bling blong, everyone, and welcome to a Talking Mission Hill special presentation. I am one of your hosts for this one, Bob Mackey, who is here with me as always.
Hey, it's Henry Gilbert, proudly wearing my Gus T-shirt as we are in the afterglow of quite a fun day.
A great hour-long conversation with Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, the creators of Mission Hill. Of course, you know them as the showrunners of Simpsons Season 7 and 8. They were writing on the show from Season 4 before that, and obviously they've done a lot of great stuff since then, but we got to talk to them all about Mission Hill in a Mission Hill specific interview because we just finished our Talking Mission Hill limited miniseries on our Patreon. Now, there's a very good chance that you're listening to this as a patron on our Patreon, and if so, thank you. But we are also putting this out on the Talking Simpsons feed so more people can listen to it. So if you're curious, we just went over the entire season of Mission Hill using the Talking Simpsons treatment, and the first episode of that was on the Talking Simpsons feed a few months ago. But if you want the rest of the episodes, there are 13 more of them that cover all the episodes and one episode about the unproduced episodes. To listen to those, you need to go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons and sign up at the $5 level. You'll get all of Talking Mission Hill and also all of our limited miniseries we've done before that, and anything we do in the future as long as you stay a patron. So yeah.
Oh, and our previous interviews with Bill and Josh actually are part of your $5 sign up too.
That's right. I think this is our third chats. We've done 2 Josh Weinstein interviews, 2 Bill Oakley interviews, maybe 3 if you count the live show.
Yeah.
So we talked to them a lot. And we somehow find new things to ask them every time, especially because we haven't really talked too much about Mission Hill with them before because we hadn't watched the series in a while before doing this miniseries, and now we came preloaded with so many questions about Mission Hill. You're going to learn so much about it.
We got so many details that they've not revealed before. We asked them about, episodes they didn't do commentary for on the DVDs, and if you've listened to the Talking Mission Hill, you know that me and Bob often have said, boy, I'd like to ask Bill and Josh about this, or we tried to remember all the things, the most important questions that were burning for us in the podcast we did, questions about Yale, about their voice acting, all these things. We learned a whole lot from this interview.
And of course, we talked plenty about the possible upcoming show, Gus and Wally, and you'll hear all of that in our interview with Bill and Josh, so please enjoy. So we are here with Bill and Josh, and guys, we are at the very end. We just finished our Mission Hill podcast, and as we're doing it, we're hearing internet buzz all over the internet of this new Wally and Gus potential show. We wanted to start off the interview by asking about this because we're very excited about this potential program being somewhere.
So are we. Somewhere other than our computer.
Yes, our computer in our heads.
Right.
When did you guys start talking about this? I'm sure since, for the last couple decades you've been wanting to do more Mission Hill, but what was the impetus for this new discussion and planning of a sequel series?
It was in October. I don't even remember what the inspiration for it was. It was in October, and for some reason it just occurred to us that it might be a good time to try to bring it back. But I don't know, I think the thing is we had thought about it multiple times over the past couple of years because there had been talk about a Mission Hill comic book. Do you remember this, Josh? About 3 or 4 years ago, we were going to do a Mission Hill. I actually had several meetings with the publisher about it, and there were a couple different ways to go. I think we actually decided on the final incarnation before we just said fuck it was 2 different versions of Mission Hill that had gone. One had gone really well and one had gone really badly in the future. Do you remember this? Right. And then, and one of them, Andy had reached his dreams and become Matt Groening, and things were going really well. And the other one, things had not gone well. And it was going to be Mission Hill Light and Mission Hill Dark, and there'd be 2 different comic book lines. And then I think we just decided that it was going to be a huge amount of work, and to maybe have 200 people read it, and it just kind of fell by the wayside at that point.
I maintain that's still a great idea to do both.
Oh yeah,
it is kind of funny. I mean, I suppose that we could have flash forwards in Gus and Wally if we ever did that, because they're going to be flashbacks. We'll get into that in a second. Anyway, so sometime around October, it suddenly occurred. I think it was to me, but we talked about it almost immediately. Was what if we made the show more about Gus and Wally? I mean, Gus and Wally were our favorite. Well, we liked writing for all the characters, but they were by a slight margin our favorite, and it just seemed like a good time to maybe launch a show You know why it was? Because there's been so much crazy animation. It used to be that you had to launch animation that would appeal to a large audience, and now you don't. You can launch an animated show that only appeals to a few thousand people, assuming you can get the money for it. And we were like, and I don't think even 5 years ago we would have thought that it was feasible to launch a show where Gus and Wally were the stars, but now it seems like it's possible. So it just occurred to me, like, what if we made the show the same show pretty much, but with increased emphasis on Gus and Wally and with flashbacks.
Right.
And that's the big difference.
Yeah. And also part of the thing is because Andy moved to Mission Hill, now a few years ago, but Gus and Wally have lived there for like 40 or 50 years. So there's the whole history of Mission Hill and their history. So it's like, we always felt like that's a whole rich world that we didn't explore, except in that one wonderful, maybe the best episode about Gus and Wally's love story.
Oh, I was going to say that a number of people on Twitter have expressed alarm that the other characters are not going to be in it. And let me put everyone's fevered minds to rest that of course the other characters are going to be in it. It's essentially the same show as Mission Hill, except there's more Gus and Wally and there's flashbacks. So like what I mean to say is there probably won't be quite as much Kevin and Andy, although there'll still be plenty of Kevin and Andy. There's going to be a lot of slightly more Gus and Wally and also flashbacks. And that's part of the thing we wanted to do is tell stories. There's a lot of shows that kind of have that operate in two timelines these days. And we wanted to have some episodes that dealt with what it was like in Mission Hill in the 50s and 60s and 70s and deal with alternative lifestyles, not just being gay, but also like the whole world of beatniks and hippies and the whole 70s kind of thing with the swingers and all that stuff. There's so much alternative lifestyle material from America all for the second half of the 20th century that's never been dealt with really on TV.
Yeah,
and we wanted to have Gus and Wally as
an animated show, where it's like it's also about the history of alternative America.
Oh,
yes,
that's cool.
Awesome. Yeah, we were talking about this on our podcast, and we were hoping that it would be a period piece because we feared that Gus and Wally couldn't survive this long. And also, I don't want to see any fiction written after
what are
like
you talking
2018.
about?
He is immortal. He could be immortal, but like I kind of want to revisit the cushy 2000 era.
Specifically, anything before 9/11.
Yes,
I think that's good.
Yeah, that's a theoretical. Like we decided that too, and I can't tell you how many times we've debated this over the years. If Mission Hill were to come back, would we age it up? We would make it today. And the answer is no. It's a time capsule, and it exists almost exclusively in the world before 9/11. So theoretically, the show never gets to 9/11. In not only in Gus and Wally, but in the universe. I think because it's a capsule of that era. So that's people have been asking about that too, and I think in theory we're never going to arrive at that date.
No, that's great. And yeah, that last episode is the Gus and Wally one is. I think it is my favorite. I think we gushed about it quite a lot when we did, and also like my husband, he'd never seen it before until he watched it with me for doing the podcast, and he seriously had like tears in his eyes at the end of it. Like
that's great.
It was so it's really touching to us. Yeah.
We should make sure to give Dan McGrath credit for that because honestly, Dan McGrath's first draft of that thing was brilliant. And so much of the material that you see on screen and you love just came right out of his head. And like, I don't want to be a credit hog. I want to make sure that Dan gets the credit for crafting a lot of that backstory in that episode, specifically all the movie stuff and kind of the whole world of the Ed Wood characters and the Man from Pluto, which I think he wrote mostly by himself.
Yeah, Bill, I don't know if you were leaving clues behind for the fans, but I remember a very suspicious Instagram story with John Vitti, and I remember telling Henry, like, John Vitti's in this story. They're working on something. I know it.
We only talk about food. Vitti and his wife and I correspond quite a bit about food these days. And he's actually really popular. He's as my most popular guest reviewer. I'm always trying to get him to review new stuff because people think he's really handsome, like instead of John Ritter.
It's always great to hear from him. We just interviewed him not too long ago.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, but I'm hoping that right now the Gus and Wally show is a twinkle in your guys' eye, but I really hope that it like you guys are the movement starts happening on that because it's too good of a tease.
We do too. Some of the movement has already happened. I would say
All right.
it's not just an idea; it's already a document. It's already we have attempting to working out a deal with Warner Brothers, and I believe we'll take it out. Now, there's no guarantee that any of these places will buy it because Mission Hill is an expensive show with a very devoted but not huge fan base. So I'm hoping that we will sell it to HBO Max or something like that, but there is no such guarantee.
Yeah, though, I mean, right now, animation, like that's a work from home kind of show. Like,
Yes, it can be done. And also the cool thing is with all the talk about it on the internet, we've seen even more fans come out of the woodwork. And it's like a really overwhelming amount, which is great. And so we feel like there's the audience for it, the audience that's kind of been waiting, and the audience, a lot of them people were kids or teens at the time. And so now they're right around or just past Andy's age. So it's kind of perfect for that too.
Also, I mean, this is the thing, the eternal problem with this kind of thing is that let's just say that without being too braggy, Mission Hill has a lot more substance than a lot of these other shows. I mean, you've seen with the laundry list of shows that are returning. And I would say that we're not quite like that. Like, we're not a show that 12-year-old boys are going to immediately love. This show, is particularly the Gus and Wally version, is actually going to require a fair amount of interest in like cultural history and things. It's still going to be funny, but it's not going to just be a gag fest. And in our experience, it's always been harder to sell shows that are not gag fests.
Man, I am hoping for the best and have my fingers crossed. I hope that our show, us covering Mission Hill, has helped to spread the word a little bit and help with this too.
I bet it has, and we're grateful for that.
Oh, thank you. We'll have more to cover in the future, hopefully. But I guess we can get into our questions. We're trying to cover stuff that we haven't really heard in past Mission Hill interviews, so hopefully you guys haven't answered these questions 1,000 times. But I guess we can start off with, we had just actually interviewed Lauren McMullen recently, and it was great to talk to her. And we were just wondering, like, how did you find her, and how did she enter the project initially?
I want to say also, Lauren, before we move on from Gus and Wally, Lauren is involved in Gus and Wally too. That was one of the most exciting developments of the past 6 months. Is that she indicated that she wants to be involved from the ground floor and is going to come with us to the meetings and is going to basically reprise her old role as the visual genius behind the whole enterprise. So that is another thing that we are extremely excited about.
That's great. Yeah, I wasn't sure how much you could say, but that's great. She just sent a bunch of stickers, vintage Mission Hill stickers.
Oh my God, I ran out of those because for the last 20 years, I stick them on the luggage when we travel because they're so bright and easily identifiable. And I finally ran out like 2 years ago. So those are very
I got like 4 left. Yeah, they are.
I don't want to stick them on anything.
Yeah, they're too valuable to actually be stuck to things.
But I'll tell you, Lauren is a true animation genius. So it's like she's like an equal person in this show. And how good it was.
And you met her in college, or Bill, I think, didn't you? Were you working on the Lampoon at the same time?
Yes, Lauren was president of the Lampoon on the first year I was on, and she was one of the best. It was a weird time where we had 3 of the best artists of the century on at the same time. Her and Paul Felix and Mel Horan. And Paul Felix went on to, he's a big wheel at Disney and stuff. And but Lauren was amazing. She was elected president, and she had an uncanny ability to also work in a lot of different styles too. Like, she would, like, if you said we want this to be drawn like the comic strip Nancy or the Wizard of Id, like, she could do it. And she was only 19 or 20 years old. And so, like, we worked with her many times, and we're also friends with her, just like socially. And I don't even remember what happened with Mission Hill. We were like, we tried to get her on at the ground floor, didn't we? I remember sending her the first draft of the script.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yes, because I still have also like some very early, like, her thoughts that she had on it and stuff. I think we needed her and wanted her from the very beginning, or 2 weeks after coming up with it.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it. Like, I think we sent her stuff from the beginning. I mean, remember, she did all the very first drawings. She's the only one who ever did any drawings for Mission Hill, and we had all these discussions. I still have those things. I have those faxes, literally old yellowed faxes with all the different incarnations of what Andy might look like and what Kevin might look like. So yeah, she was on from the ground floor with this thing, and I think she had already directed episodes of King of the Hill and maybe even Simpsons at that point.
I think she had maybe just done King of the Hill.
She had done Critic and then King of the Hill, and then you guys.
Oh yeah, the Critic. Yes, right. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, that's yeah. I had heard in another interview, Bill, you say like she's basically a co-creator on it. I think we've after doing this podcast, we've really come to appreciate like her influence on the show much more too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's totally, because also if you
Absolutely.
look at if you look at like the drawings and the official drawings, there's like a signature like a Matt Groening, but it's WOM, which is Weinstein, Oakley, McMullen.
Oh, I never know. Oh, that's so cool.
So it's not in everything, but it's just in some things. So, but it was like from the beginning.
It's on the stickers and stuff.
Yeah, it's like it's us three. So,
okay, so when you guys were, working on the pitch for Mission Hill, did you guys have any other shows you were pitching as part of your deal at the production company, or was it really all on Mission Hill?
That was a golden era of people wasting money on TV writers. Like there's every TV writer was getting a big deal, and like all you had to do was just come up with a show and pitch it. And because there was such a lucrative, syndication market back then for shows like Friends and Seinfeld or whatever, and like, so every sitcom writer was thought of as a very valuable commodity, and it was like they pay you just to sit in your office and come up with one idea. So yeah, no, that was what we were doing, and we pitched it. Like this show was not an easy sell either. Like we wanted to sell it. I remember every one of those meetings where people rejected it, and I remember the things they said, and it drove me. Still echoes in my head. I'm sure Josh will be able to do his impression.
No, tell me, because I seriously blocked them out. Except for the like it must have been traumatic. But tell me.
I'd say, this just a preamble. I've always been wary of these times where people are like, it's the animation boom. People are buying animation because those are the times where we never sell our shows. That's what people are saying now. And that's why I keep my fingers crossed for Gus and Wally. At this time, everybody was buying shows, animated shows, most of which were a catastrophe. If you remember these ones on NBC, I'm not going to say their names because the people who worked on them, God bless them. We all are in the same boat in this stupid business. But anyway, there are a lot of shitty animated shows on in 1999 and 2000. We pitched our show to, I think the first place was Fox. And I remember that meeting, and it sucked. And then we pitched it to NBC. And I remember a number of the criticisms, which Josh, I'm not, would continuously repeat in a sarcastic way for years thereafter, about it, it was animated Rent, and how the character was a loser, and all these certain things that the president of NBC said. And I think we even may have pitched it to CBS. Anyway, so we finally ended up at the WB, and the WB at that time was like, nobody knew what it was. It only had a few shows on. They were shows like, there was that exercise show about a gym, and there were a number of different weird shows that were on in this first couple years at the WB before it decided to become the Teenage Girl Network. And we pitched the show to them, and they were like, they loved it, and they immediately bought 13 episodes, and it was the greatest sale of our career. And then the sad story of what happened, as if you may recall, if you're old enough, is that during the time after we sold it, but before it came on the air, it suddenly became the Teenage Girl Network. Like they bought Buffy. Buffy suddenly became a huge hit, and they put on a whole bunch of other shows of that type, like Roswell and blah 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 blah. And when our show came on, it was this weird redheaded stepchild that had no place on the network. They still had this weird night of shows for an African American audience, like Jamie Foxx and Steve Harvey, which also we didn't belong in, and they just stuffed us in there. We were canceled after 2 episodes. The end.
That's a succinct way of putting it. Yeah, no, that also, why did they skip the second episode in the order that it's on the DVD? Because it went straight from the pilot to Porno for Pyro, and skipping the Great Sexpectations one. I
believe that they thought that the Porno for Pyro was the most likely to get attention. There were two different things, and a lot of this, a small amount of it, has to do with our own hubris, being that we were in a number of things where we were insistent that the show had to be on in the fall, which was ultimately, I think, a mistake. But they listened to us, because it probably should have been on in the winter, like most animated shows debut in the winter.
They should have slightly on.
But we lobbied them, and we succeeded in getting it on the show in the schedule in the fall. And we also were like, it has to premiere right after Buffy. And we were like, because for some reason we thought that like the teenage girl audience of Buffy would appreciate Mission Hill, and they really did not. So they put the pilot on right after Buffy at our insistence, and it totally did very shitty ratings because people did not cross over from Buffy to Mission Hill. And then I think that they selected the Porno for Pyro one as possibly the most dynamic, the one episode that would get the most people talking. So that was the first one that they decided to broadcast. And I don't even remember if they broadcast another one after that.
Because it's a sexy episode with Kevin in the bathroom of a bodega.
Right.
I think the next one didn't air until like June after that, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, so we just revisited the whole series, and structurally, we definitely noticed that, unlike your Simpsons episode for the most part, a lot of Mission Hill has a lot of these modular B-plots that end up disappearing by the end of the only season. Was that something you wanted to do, or you were intending to do from the beginning? Because towards the end, your stories were getting too big for these smaller B-plots to fit in.
I think that was a fact that it was a symptom of the stories being too big. Like Gus and Wally, the episode Plan 9 originally had a subplot, which I think appeared in one of those Lost episodes, which was about the SUVs. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I
think it's in one of those last episodes where where Andy and Jim are driving around and are annoyed at yuppies and SUVs, and they finally get a combine. And they drive down the street. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's in the Yale script, I believe. The Death of a Yale Man one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was moved into that. Because that was originally in McGrath's script, which made it way, way, way too long. So we just cut it out. And I think that's because the nature of the stories, certain stories require a huge amount of real estate, and that was one of them.
And did you, were there any other like B plots you didn't use that you had like plans for, like the, that edible couch one is a pretty, I think that's my favorite of the modular B plots. Did you have any others you weren't able to use?
I don't know that we have too many modular ones. Honestly, some of this stuff is going to appear in Gus and Wally. So I'm not going to spoil it. There are a few, I would say there's at least 12 episode or, runner ideas that we've fished out of our old files that are now part of the Gus and Wally canon.
Oh, great. Awesome.
That were fantastic.
So those, I'm not going to give those away. I would say that the only episode that we didn't do that we really wanted to do was this Christmas episode where they were going to go to Wyoming to visit the French's parents, and there was a number of crazy stuff. I just remember a lot of different scenes that were pitched for that, like Jim having to go outside and smoke in the blizzard outside, and the parents, how the parents deal with Andy and Kevin together. There was a lot of fun stuff, but that was the only episode that probably will not appear in Gus and Wally. That was a Mission Hill Lost thing.
Did you guys have any plan? There's not a lot of guest stars on this show. Did you guys have any plans for guest stars in Mission Hill that you weren't able to get, or did or no?
I don't think we've never. I think we're never huge fans of guest stars unless it's like we just like crazy old people like Lawrence Tierney and stuff, and we never like it. I maintain that it's not a huge draw to have a guest star unless it's somebody who has like an amazing voice.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't even recall that we wanted Eunice to be a guest star, but then Michael Paynes, who was friends with Jennifer Jason Leigh, was like she would love to do it, and then we were like, oh, fantastic. But I don't recall that we ever had any ambition to have a lot of guest stars, because also we had such a good cast, and like I didn't really care. Like in retrospect, it seems like we actually kind of were anti-guest star. Now, as you said it, Josh.
Yeah, because also it's all people like Nick Jameson and Tom Kenny and all these people can do so many different voices, or like Charlton Hestonopoulos or whatever. Like those guys are great mimics. So unless there's somebody who's like, oh, Jennifer Jason Leigh is really great and she's friends with somebody on the show, that was it. And like Dave Thomas, who we had worked with before, so we wanted him, as a teacher and stuff.
And Mr. Newmeyer.
Yeah. Oh God, he's so good as that old war criminal. I love it. He's so good.
Yeah.
Was your role as showrunners any different on Mission Hill in terms of how you ran the room compared to The Simpsons?
We didn't really have a room on Mission Hill. I remember this distinctly. This is where we invented our new style of working, which is not room. The room only exists for pitching out the stories.
Okay.
And at this point, I distinctly remember when we made that decision, which was after the first table read. And we came back, and we had this dumb schedule where we were going to have to record the episode the day after the table read. And we sat down with the whole writing crew to go, okay, let's see if we can get a better line for this. And it took like about an hour to come up with one better line. And I think we just left the room, and I made this conversation, we're not going to do it this way. And first of all, and we moved the record a week. We told Colin to move the record a week down the road, and we disbanded the room. And everybody, this is where we've used this system on every show we've done since then, which is basically the room Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's so much better than The Room. The Room exists for the story, and you can spend 3 days in the store on the story pitch if you want to, in a deep dive, talk about every little thing. But then it's up to the writers, and like then we would basically do once a script came in, Josh or I, or actually Rachel, my wife who worked on the show, or Haynes one time, Dan McGrath one time, would kind of do a pass, and then we'd assign to the writers like come up with 5 different funny signs for this bodega. Come up with a funny response to this, and people would just turn them in, and we would put them in the script, or we would have someone else put them in the script.
Yeah, you get by doing that, the modular system, you literally get like 10 times more jokes than you would normally get.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That
The one thing that you don't get is like people riffing off each other and improving the joke and whatnot, but I think that there's times for that. Like you can do that at the animatic rewrite or whatever.
Yep.
You don't have to do that. The Room is, in my experience, The Room is a vast waste of time, especially since the invention of cell phones, where people are looking at their cell phone half the time. It's like you could do the work. You could do twice the work and be gone by 3:30 or 4 p.m. if everybody was just paying attention or everybody was just writing the stuff on their own. So yeah, that's like the way we've been working really for over 20 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned Dan McGrath, and in our interview with him a couple of years ago, he mentioned what a great office you guys had set up for Mission Hill, and that it was that I think he mentioned that he joked that that's how he knew it was too good to last, because it was such a great office that you guys had set up.
Yeah.
He's so right, man. It was so good.
It was like because it was just a place in Santa Monica. It was a kind of in its own building. I mean, there are other offices, and in fact, when we moved in, the office next to us was Neil Young's production company, where he had all his model trains set up and stuff. But then he was moving out, but it was just like a really comfortable office, and there were nice cafes and restaurants nearby, and every writer had their own nice. Everyone had their own nice office, and it was just really comfortable.
Plus, it was also kind of nice and modern. Like it wasn't like a crappy old rundown place in Burbank where most people have to work these days. It was like it was a modern building that was brand new. That was kind of like an internet back in the internet bubble days. Like I think there was some internet company that had the whole second floor, and it was, as Josh said, you could walk to stuff. It was a really nice neighborhood. It was a really good commute. And like also it was a really good staff. Plus we had parties, man. We had parties that you couldn't get away with these days. Like that party, the Christmas party, where there was the silver Christmas tree with all that crazy shit hanging out. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember. Also, like our lawyer got really drunk. Our old lawyer.
Oh yeah, we had several parties that were really raucous, and like you couldn't get away with it because people were these days people were really drinking a lot, and there was loud music, and like the office was really fun. Like people would stay there overnight.
Yeah, people slept in the office, which you couldn't get away with now.
But also you guys, like you predicted, or there's lines in the one where the SAT episode where Kevin and his friends are talking about how like, oh, the children of baby boomers are trying to get into college and it's going to be harder than ever. Like that is a giant problem now 20 years later.
Yeah, is that from Death of a Yale Man? I don't even remember that. I haven't read that episode in so long.
That's from the SAT one when they're figuring out how they need to get, electives and everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, no, we did not. I don't recall the line you're speaking about.
Okay.
So sorry.
That's okay.
That's all right.
So we wanted to know.
But that's one thing to touching on that though is I mean, this is what people who get canceled say. But the show was ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Where it's like it feels like it's much more relevant today with everything than it was then. It was then then it felt like a weird niche thing. But it's so much, and like even people living in sections like Mission Hill have become much more prevalent now, and even more so like 10 years ago. And so it feels like now is the right time for it. And especially if Gus,
I would go so far.
Talk about so many things. But go ahead.
I would go so far as to say that also holds true to some extent with our Simpsons episodes, which I do not believe anybody liked all that much when they were initially on in 1995 and 1996. But now you can't stop hearing about them. And I think that's something, people grew up with a certain sense of humor and have now adapted to that. Like the same reason that people didn't like Conan when he was first on, but then now everyone loves him. He's doing the same stuff. I don't know. I have no idea. That's just my observation, is that perhaps the stuff we were doing wasn't really liked at the time, but it's gotten a little bit more liked over the past 20 years.
So we wanted to know also what the root of all the Yale mockery, what that is, and if that came from you and your friends trying to get into the Ivy League. There's a lot of that in this series. And how close was that to your own stories?
Well, I got rejected from Yale. I applied early.
I thought you were waitlisted.
No, I didn't even get waitlisted. I just got rejected. I applied early, and I think then that maybe I was waitlisted, but I may have just been outright rejected. So I hate them. But it's also it comes also from, I think, the old Harvard rivalry as well.
Right. Well, Kevin seems like that kind of person. It seems very organic to Kevin that he would be the type of person who would want to get into Yale rather than Harvard or Stanford or whatever. That he would specifically set his sights on Yale is a in my experience, a kind of specific type of person who tends towards the Kevin-y.
Yes.
Well so yeah, was the Yale stuff? I couldn't tell if the Yale stuff was like general Ivy League, bashing, or specifically about the type of Yale man that.
I think it's kind of both, because it's general too. Because like Andy and Jim went to Borchmore, which seems like kind of like not a great school, and so I think it's
a party school.
Yeah, it's a big party school.
Didn't have more drinking deaths, more drinking deaths than any other school, but not even counting the hazing deaths, right? That's what he said.
Yeah.
But yeah, that seems like an expensive. It still seems like a pretty fancy school, because it sounds like Swarthmore or whatever, and it sounds like an expensive school where you get a crummy education and still have to pay a lot of tuition.
Another thing with Kevin's character that hit me only in this in-depth rewatch was like, what a young Republican he is. Like he's such a kid libertarian, on top of just in the first episode when he said like his favorite, he mentioned Dilbert and Robert Heinlein, and I was like, well, okay, I get these red flags now. Like was that also your intention with Kevin?
Those weren't so crazy back then, right? Like certainly Dilbert Dilbert was on at the same time as we were on UPN, and I liked Dilbert. I thought it was really funny. I don't recall that everybody knew that Scott Adams was a kook. And so
I
fairly
think
recently,
because like the Republican vampire was our early proto guy, who now is probably like a congressman or something. But but Kevin is more just like a type of nerdy guy that we knew, as opposed to like, I think like early proto Republican.
I think your point is well taken, though. I could easily see that have been the case, that he could have been a Republican in that time, and I think perhaps the seeds of it were there.
I think while watching it, we were like, Kevin is going to become Ben Shapiro if Andy doesn't intervene.
Oh God!
Oh Jesus Christ, that's hilarious. That's perfect.
No, well, that's what I see then. Andy's dirtbagginess as like a heroic thing, that he's saving Kevin from just a life of like sheltered hatred of other people.
I think that's what happened. Like, if extrapolating from where the series ended past the point of Gus and Wally, I believe that you're correct, that living with Andy ultimately did change Kevin away from becoming a Ben Shapiro type and probably made him a better person. And that's what I imagine. That was what was going to be in the Mission Hill Light comic book. In my recollection was that Kevin really looked up to Andy, that Kevin had gotten, I think that I recall that we weren't quite sure what was going to happen with Kevin, but he was going to be doing pretty well in a really boring field, like printers. Like he lived in Silicon Valley, but he worked at a printer. He was high up at a printer place, and he didn't have any, it wasn't glamorous. So he was always trying to glom on to Andy's glamour and come visit Andy, who lived in a Matt Groening lifestyle, and try to glom on to his because he envied him, and that's probably kind of the secret. It's not a secret. That's what the whole engine of Mission Hill is, that Kevin looks up to Andy but would never want to admit it.
Also, the show had a real like video with the kids on the show. They really felt like you guys understood video games on a level that I think no network show in 1999 did. Like you guys really seem to be knowledgeable of the video game world, that including like a very it's such a tragedy that you guys did a great Ultima Online parody, but then by the time it came out, people weren't playing Ultimate Online anymore.
I think that attributes to that is that we had a fairly young staff. We had a number of people who were in their early 20s writing on the show, and also I was playing those video games at the time. I'm reading a lot of like PC Gamer magazine and stuff. So we kind of we had a bit more knowledge of that and a bit more ability to, you can't do that kind of stuff on a live action show. And so Friends wasn't doing a lot of video game stuff to my knowledge, nor was Seinfeld. So like we were able to kind of stuff it onto the air again, because also we were in a rare position of people not really caring what we were doing, which is the best position to be in.
And also the show had teen characters, which was one of the original genesis of a show, is because like The Simpsons didn't have that, and there was no real like animated show dealing with it when you're the ages of like 17 to 23 or whatever. And that was one of the original things. We're like, let's do a show about that. And was no show about older gay people in their 60s either.
So one thing I thought that was very astute, and I'm not sure if you guys knew you were doing it at the time, but it does feel like a lot of the show is a commentary of the relationship between Gen X and millennials. No one was talking about millennials, but you can see how these different factors inform both Andy's lifestyle and attitude and Kevin's. Like Andy had things a little easier as a Gen Xer, things were a little cushier, and Kevin is one of the first millennials like going to college, and there's way more anxiety, way more pressure, and he's about to encounter a lot of horrors in his adult life that the show obviously didn't cover.
I think that was an accident. I don't know that we were trying to make that generational commentary. It was just because the two brothers were two mismatched brothers, and I guess looking back, yes, you're totally right. But I think that the generational commentary was merely a coincidence because they were both of that. They're both of that age group.
Yeah, right. And also because we were Gen X, and so that's like Andy and Jim kind of like mirrored some of our like job experiences or people we knew. Or for example, like Aaron Ehaus, who's a few years younger than us, but he wrote the unemployment episode, which like really speaks to that.
Yeah, I think there was so much left unsaid in the show, but it's there. Like Andy is clearly the first child that they didn't know what they were doing, and Kevin is the younger child. And what the typical criticism of millennials is just like you had helicopter parents, they coddled you, and that's often the case with the second child in general. But I can see a lot of that commentary was there, even though you said you didn't really know you were writing it.
Yeah, that's
well. I think that's yeah, that's true. The commentary about the generations were not there, but we're definitely the first and second child thing. Definitely is throughout that. It is infused throughout that whole thing, and the way that Mrs. French coddles Kevin and treats him like a baby is part of that's part of the DNA of the show.
And I really like that in the final, the 18th script, which is the one where Kevin briefly moves back to Wyoming. Like that's where Kevin realizes how much he was coddled, and it's actually like driving him crazy. And he didn't realize how annoying it was until he had some freedom.
That's the porno star one, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That one that's a good one, man. I hadn't read that in like a decade, and I read it last year, and I was like, oh my God, this is so entertaining, and it like really brought everything together too. That I highly recommend everybody read those scripts if you have the slightest bit of interest. And hopefully, by the way, if we sell this to someplace, I think there's a possibility that they'll make those scripts.
Ooh, man.
Yeah. Now that we're on that topic, we just recorded an episode about all of the unfinished, materials for the potential season 2 or the rest of season 1, and we really wanted to know like how finalized were those scripts? Why is there only one finished animatic for an episode? We're just doing internet detective work, trying to figure out like where all these pieces came from. Can you comment on just like how complete certain things were at the time, and like around what time things were shut down?
I remember that was the absolute golden of the golden ages of the show, where we were naively assuming that everything was going to be great, and they had ordered 5 more episodes of the show. They'd ordered 5 more scripts, and this was probably about 6 months before the premiere and immediate collapse of the show. They'd ordered these things, and we had all the time in the world to do them, and we kept the writers around, and we got to spend like a week pitching out each of those stories. And I remember we were outside in like lounge chairs and stuff, and it was the most luxurious. That's why those episodes are so
I think those are the best among those are the best episodes, because it was the show hitting its stride too.
And the reason that this stuff all got was just because basically what happened, everything was immediately cut off, and every episode was in a different stage of production. Like the last 2 had only just recently been table read, and the others were already being animated. They all had been recorded. One had been storyboarded, and 1 or 2 had been turned into an animatic, and everything was just shut down immediately upon whatever it was, September 20th, 1999. So that's like why that stuff, everything was in a different stage of completion. And hopefully, as I said, in the miraculous state that somebody not only buys Gus and Wally, but also wants to make those, maybe we can dig that stuff out of the Warner Brothers archives if it's still there.
Yeah, it's like the Mary Celeste of animated shows. It's kind of just floating out there.
Yeah.
Just as we left it.
So September 99 was when it stopped. Did you guys have hopes at first that it would restart? Because I found a Variety article from the time where, you know, an executive at the production company said, was quoted as saying, "Oh, we're gonna find another time for it. Like it'll come back in the winter." Like, was that actually the plan at any point?
I think it was pretty obvious that it was not going to come back in any real way. We held out but everything was all closed down. We were already working on Futurama at that point. The offices were closed, everybody had left, and we had hopes that they were going to do something. But putting your show on in the summer is a burn off. What's called a burn off. It means that they're just broadcasting the episodes, you know, to recoup some of their money, and that's it. It's not usually known as it's not a relaunch. It's what is politely known as a burn off in TV, where it's like basically a metaphor for burning off all the remaining crops in your field so you can put something new there.
No.
So I don't think we had any hopes. We were so pissed. I cannot tell you how hugely infuriating this was, given that how many years of effort and how many millions of dollars were put into this thing to only have it broadcast twice. I can't, you know, whatever. And then the network has. Let me just put it this way: I don't think anybody's pining for the return of the WB network, but people are more interested in the return of Mission Hill.
Definitely.
Okay, so fuck you, WB network. God damn it, you assholes.
We're putting it out there.
Fucking Christ.
It's true,
I can't tell you how.
It's also, thank God for the fans and Adult Swim and stuff, and that's really to me, like, that's the birth of the show in a way.
Adult
because,
Swim.
like, that's when people got a chance to see the whole thing, and people got a chance to get into it. It's like the show wasn't given a chance at all, and then Adult Swim gave it this crazy, beautiful chance, and I think that was, in a way, the genesis of the fandom for the show.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody would have ever heard of the show. Like, it would be one of those broadcast relics, like Turn On, that was only on for one episode, canceled in the middle of its first episode. Like, nobody would have any idea that this show existed. And also, I'd also like to say fuck you to all those critics who gave Mission Hill bad reviews.
Yeah.
Because that, you know, and I still remember your names if you hear any of this, and I'm still mad at you. I fucking canceled my subscriptions to a couple different magazines because you should all go to hell. And I hate you so much. Anyway, I say we got a few good reviews, and Variety is one of them that said it was the best comedy of the year. So I really like that. But I think the thing is that, like, again, I honestly can't understand what kind of personality could watch the first couple episodes of Mission Hill and say it was awful. I don't like, what's wrong with you that you would think
because
that?
it's something different. It's when people are confronted with something different, they get all mad because they have to think or they have to adjust their brain, and they want just a standard jokey Jokenheimer animated show.
It really
and
irritates the shit out of me.
And especially at that time when people either wanted Simpsons exactly or Family Guy, or they were too old to get that animated shows could do things. And so it was ahead. I say it was ahead of its time. Yeah. And those critics are really probably like 80 years old now.
Why?
Aggravating. That was aggravating. I think that certainly didn't help the show. I'm sure that part of the reason it was canceled was because not only did the ratings suck, but also the reviews were bad. So, like, and the thing is, I found there's just such injustice. I know that every creator says this about their show getting a bad review, but I think I don't think the show was bad. I think I would be able to admit it somewhat if it were bad, if it had been phoned in or shitty or somehow. But, like, I don't think that it reserved the excoriating reviews it got in a number of major publications that continue to aggravate me to this day.
No, you guys, it was an Adult Swim show before Adult Swim existed. Like, it was like 2 years too early. It's it's really too bad. I got lots of the, Adult Swim had a number of like one season shows, but even when you see Mission Hill along with those other contemporaries of it, like, I think Mission Hill stands out among those two as like the best of those, but not to overly compliment you guys. But yeah.
Well, thank you. But it was also like, thankfully too, like they played it so often, and it's like that's where also other places like Teletoon in Canada, I think, and places in South America, there's a huge South American fandom of this show. I mean, relatively, but huge. But it's like, so it really got shown around the world by other places, not
and also because honestly, let's not. I really appreciate Adult Swim doing that, but honestly, my guess is they did it because it was cheap, and they were getting the show for cheap. Warner Brothers was like, "Hey, we got this show that nobody liked. You want to broadcast it? It's only $10 an episode. You can run it 2,000 times," and that's what they did. Now they have adopted it. Like I know that Andy French is on their billboard or whatever. They have all those. In Atlanta, at their headquarters, they had these giant paintings of all the Adult Swim stars. I know Andy French is there, so God bless them for adopting it in a more formal way. But I think most of those places just bought it because it was cheap.
Yeah, and we were just going over the production schedule, or sorry, the air schedule, and it was I didn't notice at the time because I couldn't find the show, but the last episode to air on WB was Unemployment Part 1, so I was like, people were just in limbo for 2 years not knowing what happened to the fate of Andy French.
Yeah, and that's part of the show too. Another thing that was ahead of its time too was it was in a way serialized, and it had an ongoing arc that was planned for years.
Yeah,
he was supposed to change jobs every 8 episodes. I think we said that before, but that was the initial plan.
Yeah, when we when me and Bob watched the animatic for Pink Crap Gets in Your Eyes, in that one, I thought Gwen was kind of gonna come in and out of his life, but that really was like such a serialized moment of just growing their relationship and them officially becoming a couple, plus putting Jim and Stacy together. I was gonna ask, it seemed like you guys were building a lot more, linear storytelling than say The Simpsons can afford.
Well, that was the plan. It was to keep it, is just to have the plan was for the show to go for 10. The plan in success was that the show would go for 10 seasons, and then Andy would gradually claw his way up the ladder to become basically American. We're talking about an episode of Gus and Wally where Andy French meets us and hates us. Did you remember this? We discussed this, Josh?
Yeah.
Because Andy French we had this episode. This is the ultimate masturbatory exercise, but indulge me for a second. That Andy was like The Simpsons, and he got to come to Hollywood in 1999 and have a meeting with Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, and we were just total dicks to him, and he hates us. And so that was like he's constantly running us down and stuff. And then finally, when he comes, when he gets successful, he tries to screw us at every opportunity. So maybe you'll see that someday.
Yeah, we've been longing for more of your voice acting on TV because we always forget that you're in the show and your roles are amazing, especially you, Josh, because your character is so over the top, and we just want more of you in cartoons.
That's an over the top character is much easier to portray as a non-actor.
Had you guys?
You give it. Don't sell yourself short. Toby is the performance of Toby is a masterpiece.
Oh, thank you. But I should give credit to John Candy because it was based partly on this crazy character, I think named Stefan, that John Candy played, who was like a giant kid.
Right. In Preteen World, there are a couple of sketches called Preteen World that they did on SCTV. And the drawing looks very much like that character as well. But the voice is, add an oil voice, maybe. That's what it's called.
The voice comes from me. But it was influenced by that very much.
Had you guys wanted to do voices on Simpsons before, or was that just something you decided to do on Mission Hill? I
don't think that the idea of the writers being able to do voices on The Simpsons was ever allowed or even broke, because the actors there they're super pros, and I don't recall any writer ever trying to do a voice. I don't think it was ever thought of.
Right, we did a couple of things just on the mixes where we didn't have it. Like I did the voice of that guy when Bart has that dream about going to jail.
Oh yeah,
and the guy behind the bar, because no one could do the talking through the microphone drive-through thing. So I ended up doing but yeah, it was very kind of verboten. But then I think we saw in other shows. Well, all these other shows have writers doing voices, and so
it was probably after South Park came out, and we were like, Jesus Christ, those guys do all the voices on their own show. And so we were like, we'll just take these two small characters. But honestly, now that I feel like maybe we should have a Korean guy do George Bang rather than me. That's something we'll have to discuss when we get to Gus and Wally.
Another thing I was curious about compared to The Simpsons is that definitely in the broadcast versions of Mission Hill, there's so much great, licensed music, whether it's like a comedy use of the song Cherry Pie or just like great indie music like Pavement's Major Leagues. Like, so budget wise, did you guys have a lot to use there compared to The Simpsons for licensed music?
Well, I recall that we did have a very good music budget, and we also had a great guy, Sean, who was our indie music guru guy, because like we're into some of that stuff, but he was really into it. And so his specific job was to find these great songs that would go with certain things. And then that's
most of the time they were pretty cheap though. Their songs weren't famous songs. They were
Yeah.
cheap, like because they were indie records, and so like he was always getting huge stacks of CDs from various indie record companies. But I mean, Josh handled all that. I don't know anything about music.
Yeah, so and it was also like that was the shame with like the DVD. I'm so glad like the DVDs came out and we pushed them to do it, but they didn't. It was so cheap that they stripped all the original music from it, which was a real shame.
Yeah, I also wondered like the Crappy Crudwagon script that calls for like 10 different 80s songs. I wondered like if you guys, how much that would have cost to do that episode.
It probably would have been more expensive. So like a lot of times you'll save the music budget for like, okay, we have this big music episode coming up. But I would hope too with like Gus and Wally, or we'd make a deal with some company or whatever, because we want to have a lot of music of all from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, blah, blah, blah. So I think music was an important part, a background part of the show.
My recollection, though, at least from The Simpsons, is that the songs vary widely in how expensive they are. Like if you want a George Michael song, it's going to be $20,000 a second. But if you want an ABBA song, it's $500 a second. So like, it's not necessarily how famous the song was. It's more like who the publisher is and how much of a dick they are, as I recall. Like you'd be surprised. You often were surprised at how cheap something famous was.
So I guess one of our last super specific questions is about the Real World episode. It is such a perfect time capsule to our with our fascination over that program. And what we liked about it, it's not just a parody of the Real World. Andy is in literally the show The Real World. There are MTV people there. There are mentions of Puck and actual other real people on the show. Is the title of that episode an indication you were actually worried about any sort of legal action?
They made us change that, as I recall, right?
Yeah,
there was something
big ass Viacom lawsuit, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that it was originally like something like "fuck you MTV" or something. Like the title was something that they actually made us change, and the big ass Viacom lawsuit was the result of the change. I don't remember specifically, but I remember we were intentionally trying to get MTV. MTV didn't give a shit about us. They never probably even heard of that thing. But that was like the only time anyone on Mission Hill ever heard of the thing, like ever heard of it, was then Darren Aronofsky was in the guy who directed Pi,
right?
And his famous movie director actually was in the same place where we were mixing or recording, and we showed him the Pi episode, which he loved. So that was the only time that we ever actually encountered anybody that we were talking about or sending homages to or whatever.
I also recall there's a story, isn't it, that Martin Scorsese saw it because somebody's mom was working with him or something. There's some story, and he's like, "Oh, that seems like a good show." There's some, I think.
I do not remember. That was a good impression of Martin Scorsese, by the way. Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about.
I swear, I think it might have been Colin's mom or somebody was working with Martin Scorsese, and for some reason they showed him the clip of the show, or it was on, and he commented favorably on it. Wow.
Okay, I'm glad. I'll file that away in my memory scrapbook.
Wow. And I guess one other question I wanted to ask was about how like the comic convention episode is another one that feels like so well observed and way ahead of its time. Like I think, in the last 20 years, lots of sitcoms have done the Let's Go to Comic-Con episode, but you guys were way ahead of the curve there. And also like there's not unlike how the Real World feels like such a quaint throwback to what a reality show was in the 90s. Same too when they go to see the superhero movie and Kevin's like, "This isn't right. Remember issue 213 or whatever." Like you guys were way ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also remember because we went. I remember doing a launch at Comic-Con for Mission Hill, but it was just like that was the days where you could just walk into any little ballroom. We were in some little room, maybe there were 100 people, but I remember doing that, and it was just like we always since we started on Simpsons going to Comic-Con. and so it was.
That was the last Comic-Con I ever went to. I think was that Mission Hill one.
Hmm.
I don't think I've been since then, and because it was, but that was back again. Like when I would, the whole point of going there was for me to go find issues of Mad in 1959. Like there was very little other TV stuff. There was a very small amount of TV stuff back then.
Yeah, it just shows.
Yeah, it was only animated shows where I think we're the only like TV stuff.
It shows how much nerd culture has dominated, everything. When in your 1999 show, the main character doesn't like nerd culture.
Yeah.
I feel like by default, your main character must enjoy Star Wars and video games and Doctor Who and all the nerd stuff that we are all obligated to like.
Yeah, I think it was like Andy's into alternate. He's an alternate nerd, though he wouldn't admit it. And Kevin's more of the straight by the book nerd.
No,
Battlestar Galactica.
I felt such shame
Babylon 5.
when I was a kid watching it, and by kid I mean 17, watching it and seeing Kevin say like, "This is Star Wars. Do you hear that? He thinks Geordie LaForge is in Star Wars." I was like, I was exactly that kid.
He felt seen.
You did a good impression of him back then. That was really good because I was thinking of that line that Star Wars was just, but that's the kind of thing that like that's what I would do. Like I've only seen a couple episodes of Star Trek, and I've seen Star Wars maybe once and 1.5 times. And so that's, I don't know. I feel like that's what people, and like people like McGrath or whatever, a lot of people who worked on the show probably were like that.
We did. We had an assortment of all sorts of like fanship in the show. There are other people who are huge Star Wars nerds.
So I guess we have reached the end of our interview with you guys. Thanks so much for your time. Please tell everyone where they can find you online, and maybe if you want to plug anything else, throw it out there.
Okay. You can find me, Josh. I'm just on Twitter, Josh Strange Hill.
I'm on Twitter at that Bill Oakley, but more importantly, I'm on Instagram at that Bill Oakley, where I exercise my hobby of reviewing food. Fast food and snack food. I don't care if you follow me on Twitter or even do anything else other than follow me on Instagram, because that's all I care about these days. It doesn't pay any money either.
It's highly entertaining.
It really is.
It's among my favorite things.
And we know you can't say anything, but we are looking forward to more Disenchantment whenever that comes, the new batch of episodes.
Yes.
Thank you. That should be winter, maybe.
Okay.
And yeah, even in these times, your food reviews have been great, Bill. So thank you.
Thank you. They've migrated mainly onto the stories because there's been so little. Fast food is kind of going through a slump, as you might imagine. They're not really launching a lot of new stuff, so I haven't been doing as many videos. But I have compensated by doing far more weird homemade type stuff on my story. So check it out there.
And I guess all our listeners need to spread the word about Gus and Wally and
go out in the street, start firing a shotgun in the air.
We're very hopeful, and the fan support is happening to us.
Yeah, if anyone listening to this is an executive at HBO Max or Netflix, just call us up and buy the show. We don't have to go through all this rigmarole. You just use our Twitter handle and say you want the show, and whatever. Or for instance, or if your mom or your sister or whatever, or your husband is one of those executives, tell them. All they have to do is just send a message to us on Instagram or Twitter. We're there all the time. Just buy the show. We don't have to go through all this rigmarole, people.
And
we've already got stuff ready.
And also, what if Andy had two? What if Andy had two cool friends named Bob and Henry in this new series?
I like that idea.
The designs, I'd say the designs
I
are
love
already
those
done.
designs.
Masterpieces.
Oh, yes. Thanks to Nina Matsumoto, who drew us.
Seriously, those are they're such perfection.
They're really
that
perfect.
We should put them in.
Yeah.
I was honored to be drawn in that style. That was she's the best. But all right, I guess. Thank you guys so much as always.
Thank you.
Like, oh man.
And best of luck with Gus and Wally.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Crossing our fingers.
So yes, thanks again to Bill and Josh for being part of this interview. And again, if you want to hear all of Talking Mission Hill, it's at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. Sign up for $5. You'll get that. And if you want to find Bill and Josh online, Josh is at Josh Strange Hill on Twitter, and Bill is at That Bill Oakley on Twitter, and also That Bill Oakley on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're really missing out if you're not following both those guys on Twitter. I mean, if you love Simpsons history or Mission Hill updates, like they are both keeping you abreast of that stuff. Plus, I mean, Bill is the foremost food critic in my mind right now.
Definitely. And hopefully in the future, there'll be another Mission Hill interview, possibly about Gus and Wally, and we're hoping that comes to pass. So, yes, thanks
Tell
again.
all your friends about Gus and Wally. Tell them to make it happen.
Spread the word. Bombard every City Hall meeting with questions. Where are Gus and Wally? I need answers.
Shove the anti-mask people out of the way and be like, no, Gus and Wally is what I need answers on.
This is more important now. So, yes, thanks so much for listening. And again, if you want the other episodes, go to the Patreon, and we'll see you again in the future for another great interview.
Ever tried reading while jogging, cooking, or even juggling flaming torches? Yeah, it doesn't end well. But with audiobooks.com, you can conquer books without the circus act. Dive into over 450,000 titles, including more than 10,000 free ones. Get hooked on a bestseller, find your next obsession, or finally read that classic you've been avoiding since high school. And here's the inside scoop. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial and snag your first 3 audiobooks on the house. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.